when I began here in North Thurston on the board in '77, we had 2.3% students of color. When I left the school board 20 years later, it was up to 30-some% students of color. And now it's approaching majority minority students of color here in Lacey, North Thurston School District, which many people don't realize. They think of Seattle, they think of Tacoma, Lakewood, Kent, Renton, but right down here in North Thurston. And so my interest has stayed very active. I was an original member of the African American Affairs Commission, and education was one of our focal points. And again, from the policymaking aspect, data gathering, data analysis, research, and just very concerned about the inequities in education and what the data was showing and who's not making it and who is being left behind. This was in the George Bush days with the No Child Left Behind federal legislation, which forced states to really take a look at disaggregated data, no longer just the big volume of general data. And that first disaggregation was a shocker.
In what way?
From the point of view of the underperformance of students of color, and particularly black students, and more specifically black boys. And so it's just comes right on down that funnel to the stem of the funnel. So the education reform work that I've been engaged in, looking at reform methodology to change those kinds of outcomes, and my community participation pretty much took me to those advocacy groups. League of Education Voters, I served on that board for 5 years. The work through the African American Commission, the Black Education Strategy Roundtable, focusing in on the inequities, the disproportionalities. I've done a lot of work in the school to prison pipeline because the analysis of the disproportionality in discipline just takes you to the disproportionate numbers of suspensions and expulsions. So what happens to you once you're suspended or expelled? You're no longer learning, you're on the streets, and this was during the time earlier on when the gangs were really proliferating in the state of Washington. Well, they were made up of dropouts and suspended, disciplined kids, and became very clear as to the school to prison pipeline and how directly related to policies in schools that were putting kids in the streets. And my work with the Race and Pedagogy Conference up at the University of Puget Sound focused in on the school to prison pipeline, and where public policy really did accelerate those kinds of things. Back in the Clinton days with the 3 strikes you're out, and the anti-drug movement and all, that put so many black males behind bars for crimes no worse than a majority of the population. So the impact on communities when you remove a huge element of your community and they're now incarcerated, the impact on the children, the impact on the parents that are left to deal with. And so the school and the education system was just so critical to everything else that was going on in the dysfunctionality of the black family and the black community. So through school policy, you know, what is being offered? What kind of access and opportunity is there? Why aren't black kids leaving our schools prepared for post-secondary education? What are the crummy courses you're guiding them into that's not coming anywhere close to accumulating the prerequisites they need to apply to anybody's college? You know, and so you do your advocacy work at the district levels or with OSPI and ask the questions. Oh, we weren't aware of that. Oh, we didn't know that. How can you not know that? Where are you getting these numbers? These are your numbers, you know, depending on what school district you're in, Seattle, Tacoma, whatever. Well, we take very strong exception to these numbers. Well, you're the source of my information. These are your numbers. You know, how can it be that you're only graduating 47% of your black students? Doesn't that, you know, so you're there addressing the school board and raising those issues, and well, we'll have our staff look into it kind of thing. And so it has to be at the state policy level so that the impact can impact all 295 school districts and not just one particular school district, because what's going on is happening all over, not just in one particular school district, but it's more prevalent in one district over another. So the whole issue of inequities in education, inequities in access, inequities in opportunity, inequities in resources to address the issues. And so education reform had been an arena that I kind of parked a lot of that time and energy until I just became exhausted, you know, trying to make change in a system that was just so immobile. Too much energy going into maintaining the status quo and not enough energy into doing anything any differently. And so the outcome's not changing, and that pretty much led to my interest in charter schools. Since this rock is too hard to move, maybe there's a better chance of designing schools from scratch. What do schools need to look like? What should the curriculum look like? What should the expectations be? What should the standards be? And so charter schools, after all those years of struggling to even just get them doable in the state of Washington, so it was an opportunity to put some substance to that. And by that time I had gone back to grad school and gotten my doctorate in educational leadership and change, so far removed from the biochemistry degree that I got as an undergrad. And so through all that research, through all that exposure and in and out of schools all over the state, all over the country really, as part of state and national and regional task forces, commissions, there were places that really were working.
Like where?
You have a prep school in Chicago, for instance, all black school, all boys school, 100% graduation, 100% going to Ivy League schools. And these same kids, low income, single parent homes, inner city. So how can they do it? And others can't do it. So you research and you look at what are they doing differently that we might be able to import.
What were they doing differently?
Well, starting out with high expectations, other than, like George Bush used to say, the bigotry of low expectations. You raise the level, you set the standard, and you tell the kids, first of all, failure is not an option here. You know, you just set a whole new standard. You tell those parents, you are important to the education of your child. We must partner with you. We only have them 6 hours a day. You have them the other 18. And so you get that parental engagement. You begin very early, making sure that they are competently moving from one level to the another. If you aren't doing a sound job at the elementary level, such that all kids are reading by 3rd grade, they are doomed through the rest of their school career.
Really?
You aren't taught reading after 3rd grade. So if you're leaving 3rd grade and can't read, and when you look at the test scores and you see the horrible test scores in the English language in the state, you know, and you ask a district, well, what interventions are you putting into place? Being that, you know, X% of your kids are not reading at grade level, how do you expect them to advance beyond 3rd grade and stand any chance of being successful as a middle schooler? And by the time they get to high school, they've made up their mind that this isn't for me, you know? And so you have to ask those hard kinds of questions, and you look at how in those very successful schools, they start talking about college to their kindergartners. We're getting you ready for college, you know? So if you're successful by the time you leave 5th grade as an elementary kid, you're reading, you're writing with comprehension, you're at grade level. You stand a chance in middle school. and keep that same pressure on at middle school, then by the time you hit ninth grade, you've only got 4 years to accumulate 24 credit units. You fail one course, and you aren't going to graduate with your class without some summer school, some intervention, some after school, some Saturday, you know. And so this is how these very successful schools do it.
Are they charter schools, or are they?
Some are public, some are charter. It's quite a mixture.
Right. What about
some
the
are
one in
magnet
Chicago?
schools, some are, you know.
The one in Chicago that you referenced, what kind of
It's
school is that?
it's a public school.
Really?
It's a public school.
Wow.
Not private, so that means that any student can go there. It's not the cream of the crop, only those whose parents can afford it.
Right.
And so looking at those kinds of models, so that was a one-gender school with
Right.
boys. There are some very successful one-gender schools with girls, especially at middle school, with the focus on STEM, with the focus on hands-on learning, you know, a different kind of curriculum, a different way to teach reading, math, science without, you know. And so there are models out there, and to look at those models and to try to duplicate as much as possible, because you can't completely duplicate it because so much of it depends on unique professionals, teachers that just have the gift of turning kids on to learning. You can't transport that
Right.
from a Chicago to a Lacey, Washington, or to the state of Washington. But you know that the personnel is so key to it. And, you know, this dance of the lemons where inadequate teachers just get passed around from one low-performing school to another. So you have your highest caliber of teachers in your most needy schools, just the opposite of the way we do it now by virtue of negotiated contracts. See, there we are with a public policy
Right.
issue that if you don't want to deal with that, then you can forget trying to move this system and make any changes. All of that becomes an obstacle in your way. So the charter school movement provided an opportunity within the context of the same state laws, rules, and regulations to design a school from the ground up, and to only have people in it who are there by choice,
Right.
the same as the parents and the kids are there by choice. And so that's where a lot of my energy has been the last 5 years, since charter schools have been an item here in the state of Washington. And then the 10 years or so before that, with all of the legislative advocacy, just to get us to that point. It took us 4 tries before charter schools became legal in the state of Washington.
And what is your assessment on how charter schools are going now?
I think we have 12 around the state now. And it hasn't been enough longevity, but the data is really beginning to indicate that they are making quite a difference in the lives of the students that choose to go there. SOAR Academy, the charter school in Tacoma that I chair the board, you know, this saying, if you build it, they will come. Well, you don't know if they were going to come or not.
Right.
This was a new thing, and there was so much negative
Yes.
stigma out there about what charters were, what charters weren't. And so we didn't know who would come, if anybody. And we're coming to the end of the 4th year. And who's wound up there has been 73% kids of color, 85% free and reduced lunch, 13% homeless, and on and on and on, with parents fleeing the community school where they just have not been pleased with the
Right.
service, with the level of educational achievement their kids have gotten. And so kids who never thought they were college material in some of the middle and high school charter schools, they're on their way. They're on their way. You know, middle charter school, here come the kids reading at 2nd and 3rd grade level as 6th and 7th graders. And their test scores aren't necessarily going to show it, but you can show the academic growth of we got them reading at second grade level, and by the time they left us at the end of this year, we now have them up to fourth grade.
And why are charter schools specifically helpful to African American students?
First of all, the level of cultural competency, just the cultural relevancy, the cultural inclusion, the acceptance of meeting a kid where they are, not where you wish they were, but where they are. Understanding their different learning styles, understanding some of their background, some of the baggage they bring when they come, the approach to serving the needs of the whole child, and not just the 6 hours on an academic kind of thing. If you can't deal with the trauma the kid is going through at home, if you can't deal with the homelessness, if you can't deal with the hunger, the best teachers in the world aren't going to be successful at teaching you. So when you engage that family and those parents, and you're telling that child, we don't want to know anything about your past educational experience. And we've got some second graders with files this thick, but they've been kicked out of every preschool. They've been kicked out of, and the parents will come and say, you're the last resort.
Wow.
And to see the turnaround in those children, to see the change in their behaviors, to see how quickly they begin to learn. But you look at the record or the test score, and they're deemed special needs or learning disabled, and many of them turn out to be highly capable, sometimes gifted, which becomes a part of why the behavior was an issue. They're bored, not challenged. And so if you have a different environment of a can-do, and you're all gifted and talented, and it's our job as professionals to find which particular gift you have. That's a whole different message to a student. Whole different message.
How do we improve the educational access and what you're talking about to a larger group of students? Because there are only how many charter schools?
12 statewide.
12. So what changes do you think need to be happening, or what changes can happen in public schools to help some of these students?
Well, first of all, public schools need to get out of denial that they are failing a significant number of their students. Have been doing so for a long time, but have ignored the fact that they've tried to make one size fit all versus acknowledge and recognize the individual differences of the students. And that goes beyond just race and ethnicity. That's just any kid. I have 3 kids of my own and 4 grandkids and 7 wonderfully different folk that I've had to deal with. Well, school is no different. But when you have that one-size-fits-all expectation, you're going to leave folk behind. And many people have been left behind. One of the things we do differently in our charter school, and most of the charter schools, we don't suspend or expel. We work on modifying the behavior that's creating a problem. You can't learn if you're not in school, but the public school, suspend you, expel you in a heartbeat.
How do we change that? Because
Public policy.
Public policy.
See, Seattle School District had to pass a moratorium at the school board level to say no more elementary school suspensions, which says to a building principal, you come up with a different solution other than kicking that child out. You must do something differently with the professional development of your teachers as far as classroom management. You must do something differently. But it took that policy. We had to pass a state law to change the discipline laws in this state because far too many kids being suspended and expelled for mediocre kinds of things. 2 kids getting a scramble in the lunchroom the black kids suspended, the white kids sent on back to class. You know,
Wow.
just all of that kind of data. There's what is going on here.
Right.
You know, had to change that.
Yeah.
You know, and call for equitable discipline and treatment. If it wasn't enough of a violation to send them both home, then send them both back to class.
Right.
It took two to tango, you know.
But I can just hear and feel parents listening to this and thinking that this sounds amazing, and yes, it needs to change at a policy level, but they might be thinking, but my kid's in a public school now.
Right.
What do we do now? Is there anything we can do now?
Then you raise the issue at the local level. You become familiar with your local data. Why is it that school X is graduating Y number of kids, and school Y can't figure it out? And you've got different principals, different teachers, different curriculum, different. And you raise the level at that local school board. Who's the policy maker? That's the local level.
Right.
So you can deal much better at your local level. It takes it quicker. Takes longer at the state level, legislative, OSPI, and all that kind of stuff. But it takes advocacy. It takes awareness about what is actually going on, and then decide we aren't going to put up with this anymore.
Yeah.
And you go in and you raise a little hell, and you know, we want to see some change.
Yeah.
And only then do you begin to, you know, you show up at those school board meetings, and it's something about seeing those faces week after week after week. Oh, we're just checking to see if you made any progress on the promises you made, you know.
Yeah.
But if you don't show up, you have to help parents understand their rights, their responsibilities, their students' rights. When your kid is expelled or suspended, do you know that you can appeal that action, and they must be kept in school until you are granted a hearing, which they must do within 72 hours. The average parent says, I had no idea. So you have to, you know, it's at so many levels. The advocacy is at so many levels.
And I know so many parents would do anything for their kids.
Anything.
But there are also so many parents that at the same time are working a million jobs, and they want to be there for their kids. They want to advocate for their kids, but they don't know how to make the time for it. They aren't aware of how to make the time for it and what to do. What is your advice for those families, or for other families to help those families? What can we all be doing?
Well, that's been an interesting scenario within the charter school movement also. Those same parents that never could find an entree into the traditional public school, they are actively engaged.
And why do you think they're more actively engaged?
Because one thing you do, which we did, was we want your parental involvement. What are the best circumstances under which we can have your engagement? And they'll start rattling it off to you. First of all, we can't be up here at 2 o'clock in the day.
Yeah. Right.
Secondly, after working 2 jobs, we have family, you know, and so, okay, you design how you want your parental engagement to look. So to show up at SOAR Academy and to see standing room only for a parent meeting, but the younger children are down the hall. There was food, everybody ate, nobody had to worry about getting home to feed the family, their grandmas, aunts, uncles, just a whole different thing, because they designed the environment and atmosphere around which they could be involved in their kids. Saturday, you know, something going on at the school and you need parent volunteers, you have to turn some of them away. It's so many. But I interact with a lot of the parents and say, I'm really curious, what is it about this school that attracted you to enroll your child or had you so engaged? We've never felt invited before. We've never felt welcomed before. We've never felt respected. We've never felt as though our input and our points of view made any difference. But here, we feel listened to. Well, if they can answer that for us, why can't the traditional public school be as amenable? But no, Through the negotiated contract, the teachers already decided we will only come back to school X number of times, and these are the terms on which they're, so that's all the parent has to go with. PTA or PTO or whatever meets at such and such a day on this time, because that's what they were able to negotiate with the teachers. But what about what works for the parents?
And what about who's advocating, or how are we able to advocate for kids who have parents who are absent entirely and don't want to participate or can't participate?
You have to allow for that as well.
How do we do that?
In our case, you know, we try to identify an extended family person, grandmother, grandfather, aunt, uncle, caring neighbor, you attend a church,
Right.
you know, trying to make sure that every child has an adult advocate, and then work to try and help that advocate become the strongest advocate for that child that they can. It takes a lot of work, though.
Right, right.
It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of resources. And the traditional funding model does not allow for those kind of resources to be there. But the difference in outcome is more than worth it.
So how do we get there? What do you think, if you could design the way forward, what would that look like? Specifically, what would that look like for low-income students, for minority students?
Well, you know, I don't think in terms of low-income students or minority students. I start by thinking about students in general, because even those students who aren't low-income and who aren't minority aren't getting the maximum out of our public education system. We have no state education plan in the state of Washington. We don't connect the real world with our schools. One only has to look at the amount of imported labor into this high-tech state, because we don't have a trained workforce that can utilize these jobs. Why is that? Why is that? So a state education policy that says all of our kids are going to exit our public schools college and work ready. And it's more than just a slogan,
Right.
and something nice to say. In order for just that to be accomplished, you've got to totally restructure the way you deliver public education. Totally restructure it so that when you leave elementary school, you have accomplished those elementary level competencies that you need. When you leave middle school, you are ready for those 4 years it's going to launch you. I mean, everybody's going to be ready, not just, you know, the cream of the crop. And when you leave high school, whatever you desire to do after that, you're ready for it. You're ready for it. But you've got to completely restructure all the way down to early learning, preschool education, in order for that to exit out the other end. Because until that happens, you'll continue to get what you've always gotten, which is certain students are equipped for an adult world, and others have been left behind. And we'll continue to feed the school to prison pipeline.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that, about why that is something important for us all to compare and consider?
Well, when you think about the mass incarceration in this country, we have the highest rate of incarceration of any industrialized nation in this world. Why is that the case? We've privatized incarceration. So the incentive, when you've just constructed this big facility with a couple of hundred beds, and you're contracted with the government and you get paid so much per occupied bed, where do those occupants come from? The adult penal system is fed by the juvenile penal system. The juvenile penal system is fed by those students who are suspended and expelled from school.
Which are weighted in...
Yes, disproportionately. Students of color, low-income kids, on and on and on. And so if you could disrupt, if you can disrupt that pipeline, if you think in terms of a sports analogy, the pros have a college feeder system. The college has a high school feeder system.
Right.
The high school has Little League, you know. Well, the schools are the feeder system of the penal system. If we could disrupt what happens in the school system, and more of those adult beds remain empty because we aren't, you know, it would change the whole picture. But education is the key.
So education is basically the foundation for absolutely
so much,
everything.
Everything. And as a society, we have not reckoned with that.
Why haven't we? Because I hear you explain it and I'm sitting here thinking, yes, exactly right.
It's not to a lot of people's advantage to do that.
Why?
Because of the tribalism, because of the, what's the word I want to use? I had a conversation with a middle school teacher once when I was in a building doing some consulting, doing some training. And she was very frank with me and said, well, I don't think all kids should go to college. Because for everyone that goes to college, they're in competition with my kid for that same job. Somebody has to do the service jobs. And I said, really? Whew. So what do you think her attitude is towards the kids she's teaching every day?
Wow.
Low expectations
Right.
of who should be achieving and who should not be.
Right.
If everybody achieved, then we wouldn't have anyone to fill the service jobs that we need.
I want to understand something that you said earlier when you were talking about the school in Chicago. You mentioned that there were very high expectations in that school, and that there was a structure. Where is...
And a belief system.
And a belief system. So maybe that's the answer that I'm looking for, which is, where is the line between structure and too much discipline? How do we create that environment? And maybe I'm coming at it from a parent's perspective, where I'm trying to create this for my daughter.
I see it. I hear it. I hear you.
Like, how do we find that balance? And I would imagine that there are teachers who are trying to figure that out for their own classrooms.
Right, right. In the case of SOAR, I can talk about
Sure.
that, where we have a discipline problem with the kid. We try to get to the root cause of the problem. Why is this kid acting out like this? What is going on in this child's life away from school? You try to get to that issue where it's not always just a tough discipline kind of issue, but you've got to want to do that.
Right.
You've got to want to do that. And with the schools in the state of Washington becoming more and more kids of color, we still have 85% of all of our teachers white females.
Wow. So how do we change that?
We still have quite a number of our teachers who will just up front tell you in all honesty, Dr. Jackson, I'm afraid of black boys. I say, how can you be afraid of black boys and you're an elementary teacher? This black boy has no control over the fact that his growth spurt hit him at a 6th grade level and you're up to his shoulder. Don't you know he feels that you're afraid of him? I just can't help it. I'm afraid. What has he ever done? Is he disrespectful? Is he using profanity? No, it's none of that. I'm just afraid of him and I don't know why.
So what do you say to those teachers who say that to you?
I have to talk to them about their implicit bias and what they're bringing to the classroom unconsciously,
Right.
and how it is impacting the relationship that's not being blended between her and I'll say, well, how many do you have in your classroom? Is it just, oh no, I have 3 or 4. So, you know, so 3 or 4 of your kids right off the bat, the first day they walk through the door, you were afraid of them.
Right.
And you treated them as such. You felt threatened by media portrayal, whatever, you know? And that goes on, and it contributes considerably to the disproportionality in discipline.
Wow. That makes so much more sense. How many years did you say you've been working along
About
these lines?
35 years.
35 years. So you've seen a lot.
I've seen a lot.
Where are we now compared to where we were when you first started 30 some years ago?
Much more challenged than ever.
Really?
Because of the growth in the numbers of students of color, the increase in the poverty levels. We never used to have to deal with issues of homelessness among students. And I don't mean living in tents, but surfing from couch to couch, from resident to resident. This address this week, that address next week. Mom didn't know where you're going to be 2 weeks, you know.
Right.
But there they are in your school every day. So you got clothing and you know. We didn't have the numbers of students needing English language services to the point that we have now. So the system has incrementally tried to add on services as needed within the context of the confines that's there versus the system is no longer structured to meet the needs of today's students. We're still trying to deliver. We're still trying to pound this square peg at a round hole.
So we're patching it instead of
piecemealing,
does
tinkering
it
around the edge versus making fundamental systemic change that meets the current needs of students. Students want more hands-on learning, you know. So you add this little course and you add that little course. That's whole systemic change needed there, and it needs to happen earlier than high school. You know, not equipped, just not equipped.
I need to change battery.
Yeah, go ahead.
Interferes with learning.
So do you think we are worse off today than we were when you first started? Or is it just harder?
We would have to define worse off.
Is the equity in education, are we addressing it? I guess I know we're not addressing it in the right way. Has equity in education gotten worse?
Yes. Inequity in education has gotten worse. And I distinguish between equity and inequity.
Right.
Because we finally moved from this thing about equal.
Right.
We fund all classrooms or we fund all kids equally.
Right.
Well, one size does not fit all. So to have to shift the mindset to say, we aren't talking about equal resources or an equal education, we're talking about an equitable education. And a lot of educators have had a very difficult time grasping the difference in those things.
Right.
If we say we fund public schools in the state of Washington with student apportionment, each student gets X thousands of dollars. Well, there should be more coming to elementary to give them that solid foundation so that so many of the challenges and difficulties encountered in middle and high school wouldn't be there. Wouldn't be there if we did a better job with early learning and elementary ed, social emotional development, and those things. So it's not a matter of equal.
Right.
And even within an elementary school, one elementary on one side of town might need more
Right.
than another elementary on it. See, that's equity.
It's access
Versus
to what you need.
equal,
Right.
that everybody gets the same, no matter what your needs are.
Right.
So the concept between equal and equitable has been difficult for a lot of educators because in their training that wasn't part of what they learned. They didn't learn about institutional racism and implicit bias and the role they play in setting low expectations of students and so forth and so on. And so I'm back to systemic change.
Right.
And that means that you've got to train teachers differently. Colleges of ed, deans of colleges of ed, you know, you have to have some very stark conversations with them because they're leaving those training institutions ill-equipped for the classrooms they're walking into. And I've worked with a number of graduate students heading out into, you know, the educational world. And they go out and do their practicum, the practice teaching, and they come back and say, oh my God, I'm ready to graduate and go out into the world and I am not prepared. You know, so what are they being taught in that college or university? And for the student to find such a different practical, you know,
application.
So when I say systemic change, it's from the top down and the bottom up.
So we need to start at both ends and find a way to
That's
meet in the
right.
middle.
That's
so
right.
As we wrap up here, looking ahead, looking forward, what can we do now? I know that a lot of this is systemic and we all need to be making changes long term. What can we do now?
First of all, we need to acknowledge where we are. Data is powerful. Many, many people have no idea we have the stratified layers of achievement among students like we do. Who are the students not making it and why? What must we do differently? So you first got to identify where we are as a system, as an educational system. Is it a teacher issue? What's the issue? Is it a teacher prep issue? So what must the colleges and universities do differently to better prepare teachers for the reality of school today? So that, you know, that's back to the system, because the K-12 system alone can't fix this. They get the 5-year-old, and there's so much differences in the 5-year-olds, anywhere from those already reading at second grade level to a 5-year-old that don't know the alphabet. One size does not fit all in that 5-year-old kindergarten room, right? So the skill and talent that a kindergarten teacher needs to craft a custom design whatever, so that all of the kids are moving along, you know, and reaching a level of achievement by the time they leave kindergarten.
How do teachers do that? Because you mentioned that they're able to do that better in charter schools, but how does a teacher, is it smaller class sizes? How is a teacher able to give that time and focus to all the individual
Smaller
needs?
class sizes help. In our charter school, each teacher has a teacher aide. So there are 2 adults in every classroom.
Yeah.
See, that's a structural change.
Right.
And when you mainstream your kids, you aren't farming out your Title I's down the hall in this room, and you know, they're there.
Right.
But it takes a certain kind of educator with a skill level enough to know how to multitask, and they actually have 6 or 7 different learning groups within one classroom, all engaged.
Wow.
You know, and if you aren't equipped when you leave your college or university to know how to do that, it takes a certain kind of professional, and that kind of professional does not survive very quickly in the traditional public school, where they are stuffed and muffled and not allowed to be creative and arrange the classroom the way they want to, or to use the instructional materials, you know, that they see a need for. That's why we wind up with some of the best teachers in charter schools. They get the flexibility and the creativity they've been looking forward to, you know.
So do you think that the new model needs to be all charter schools?
No.
Or no?
No. Learn from charter schools, and if it's working for charter schools, why can't we transfer some of those practices over there to the traditional? You know, when I talk with some of the traditional public school people, and they're complaining about charter school kids that they're losing, and their kids they're losing to charter schools, and I say, do your job, and there won't be a need for parents to be looking for alternative learning situations for their kids. Do your job, and you can work charter schools out of business. But until you do, parents want the best they can for their kids. They pass this way but once, and they don't get to do-over. There's no do-over. The do-over is on the streets, juvenile justice system, penal institution, raw meat for the school to prison pipeline.
That makes me so sad.
It is sad, but it doesn't seem to bother policymakers enough or community people enough to say that the quality of our schools determine the quality of this community,
How do we
the quality
pay,
of life.
How do we pay teachers what they're worth? Where does that money come from? If we're trying to, you mentioned 85% of teachers are white women.
Mm-hmm.
How do we change the model so that we are attracting both more diverse applicants
Mm-hmm.
and also people who are educated in the right ways to be able to cater to multiple different kinds of learning styles, and also that they get paid a living wage?
Well, they deserve way more than a living wage. As a society, we don't value educators,
Right.
for starters. Some of the other countries you go to and visit, educators are just revealed,
Right. Right.
you know. But it's inbred into the culture of those countries. Free education, free health care, you know, all kinds of things, because the child is so critical to the future of that country.
Yeah.
And they know that the school and the education system is the key. And so they put everything that's needed into that education system. In America, we don't do that. We don't do that. We have not come to the reality of how key the education system is to every other system. If we don't have an educated citizenry, our democracy is in jeopardy, and we're seeing that right now, big time. So we have to change mindset, we have to change the system, we have to change our values and value teachers. And teachers have hurt themselves a lot, though, from the point of view of they will not go for differentiated pay or merit pay. So you have teachers and you have teachers. So the kind of teachers I'm talking about, why shouldn't they be able to make more than the mediocre teacher who's not helping their children achieve? But the way things are structured, teachers are paid equally. You have X years of training and you've been in the profession for a certain amount of time, you make the same amount of money. Where's the incentive? I think teachers should be making at least six-figure salaries. At least. And all anyone has to do is spend an hour in an elementary classroom. And you walk out of there saying, oh my God, I could not possibly do that every day. We can't pay these people enough.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have to struggle.
No.
So when you say minimum wage, no, they need to be, you know, at least six figures, living comfortably.
Oh, I meant living wages, and they're not even making a living wage right now, which is insane to me.
And when I talk with teachers and union folk, I said, you know, I have educators in our family. My sister-in-law, educator, and strong union member. And I said, well, Katie, as I hear you describe half your lunchtime you take with kids, or you're staying after school, being available for kids, or you're sending extra work home, and you know, I said, all your colleagues like that? She said, oh, heck no. I said, so why should they make as much money as you do? And she just looked at me with a blank face. I said, you all have decided that that's the way you want your salary structured. You've done it to yourself. I said, I'd be the first one to pick up a sign and stand on a corner advocating for more pay for teachers. But some of the teachers I've seen, they need to be out of there. No more pay. But you all don't allow us to differentiate who's a competent quality teacher or principal that deserves merit pay or whatever. You've decided that in your negotiated contracts. You all need to fix it. And you'd have a lot more people advocating for higher pay for you, lower class size, or whatever it is you need.
Right.
But right now, you already decided that you're all teachers and you should be paid the same thing on equal, so you're suffering equally.
Are you hopeful?
You can't lose hope. You can't lose hope. I'm hopeful that the light bulb goes on somewhere and people realize that we've got to do something about changing this system. All of this tinkering isn't getting us anywhere. When I go up to the legislature and I testify at various hearings and all, and I remind the legislators that Washington State is one of a few states in the nation where the achievement gap is widening, not closing, in spite of all the additional millions and billions you all have put into the K-12 education system. What's wrong with that picture? How can it be widening and not closing? Because they're just throwing money at the same structure, the same whatever. So until you're ready to do something differently, you aren't going to get any different results. I don't care how many billions you throw at it. But it's like trying to turn a super tanker out in the middle of an ocean. You know, you can't just look up and see a port and say, oh, let's go there. Way out in the middle of the ocean, you had to decide, you know.
A long time ago.
But with no vision, no state education plan to say, if we want all of our students to exit the K-12 system with these skills and ready for these things, then we must redevelop a system that allows that to happen. So what changes must we make? So you engage the educators. You don't impose it on them. You say, help us redesign. You know, parent, how differently do our schools need to be to entice you to become an active partner in your child's education? A student, you know, and we do a lot of student focus groups. Student voice. Oh my goodness, just talk to the kids and they'll tell you.
Oh yeah.
Starting with, you know, design your dream school. And they will tell you how they want that, you know. So everybody has a stake, is what I'm saying. Ask the business community. How are you spending a lot of your training dollars? Well, we're getting entirely too many applicants that can't read, aren't computer literate. They got a high school diploma, might have graduated with a 3.5 GPA. But they've got to retrain. Why should that have to be? The business community can tell you, you know, they can't write, you know, they've got to be able to read manuals and comprehend, so they aren't reading with comprehension. So what does that say about the adjustments you need to make in the curriculum? The state law says a state goal is to read with comprehension, you know, but if they're not and they're just calling a word, you know, visually calling a word and no idea of what it says, you know. So a state plan for education that would take 10 or 15 years to achieve in increments, what would it take to change this outcome? Here's what the outcome is now. Here's the outcome we need for all students. And make alterations in that system that would help get there. I don't see or hear anyone asking those kinds of questions. State Board of Education, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. So Chris, what is your plan for education in the state of Washington now that you're the newly elected state superintendent? With Thelma, I don't even have an office yet. Give me time. I said, I would hope that you've been thinking about this quite some time. You know, you've got to come in here with the plan. And so you just have to stay in people's faces like that, you know?
I love it.
I said, okay, when do you want me to come back? 6 months, 9 months, what? How long is it going to take you to come up with this plan? You're in a 4-year position. At the end of your 4-year term, where do you want this state to be educationally in the K-12? And how are you going to get there?
Are you going to go back? And
Of
talk
course.
To them?
Yeah, every time I run into him somewhere. You know, how you coming, Chris? Working on it, you know.
Anything else that you want to add that we haven't had a chance to touch on that you think people should remember?
I would just add that people have to realize that the education of our children is everybody's business. Whether your children have passed through the system, you no longer have children in the system, your children aren't old enough yet to be in the system, education of our children has to be everybody's business. And until it becomes everybody's business, we aren't going to get where we need to be as a society. So that's the main thing.
Man,
that's the main thing.
I just want to go home and figure out what I'm going to do to help.
Good for you. So the older your child gets, the more acutely aware you will be that you have got to be involved, starting with preschool right on through.
Starting now, even.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
what you're saying is a huge takeaway for me, which is how can we address the challenges of all? So,
because our entire community benefits or not. And so, as you grow older, you know, will the system that you've paid into Social Security, who's going to continue paying into it so you can enjoy your golden year? We all have a vested interest in a quality education system in society. Key kids,
Yeah.
see what I'm saying?
yeah.
See, that's feeding the school to prison pipeline.
Yes, and when the way that you described that really, really opened my eyes a little bit. So I'm hoping to show viewers a little bit of what you're saying there, because I think that there's a lot of willful ignorance, but I think there's also a lot of ignorance we don't realize that we are having,
and how we are contributing in that, and unconscious about it.
Yes.
So there's no silver bullet. There's no one answer to
Right.
your question,
Right.
Because interventions need to happen at so many segments along the way, but it has to be systemically approached, and no longer this piecemeal tinkering around the edge,
Yeah.
which we've been doing for decades and getting nowhere,
Right.
and the gap continues to widen instead of close, and that should be the first reality. What is going on here?
Right.
We lowered class size. We gave more millions of money. We this, we that. What do you mean the gap is widening? We expected it to be closed by now. Well, what have you done differently to close it? You know, because it was in the confines of the existing structure.
And the structure is broken.
Structure's broken. The structure's broken. And when you think in terms of the structure that we have now, is the same structure we had 150 years ago.
Wow.
When you weren't educating kids of color, low-income kids, non-English speaking kids, homeless kids, on and on and on, you know. So, trying to pound a square peg into a round hole.
Isn't that the
Doesn't fit.
definition of insanity?
Yeah, keep on doing what
doing
you've
the same
always
thing.
done and expect to get something different. And it's never going to work. It's never going to work. So we have a lot of work in that suburb versus the inner city,
That's right.
you know, and on and on and on.
That's right. It's a cycle.
It is. It's a vicious cycle.
But you're right. If you look at it as having to start from both ends, like we have a responsibility at the state level and policy making level. There's a responsibility.
The local level.
Yeah.
And so there are so many pieces of it that have to fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. And it's no cheap price tag.
It's overwhelming. I'm a little overwhelmed because I kind of feel like,
But
how can we change it?
look at the billions spent on the penal institutions.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the billions spent on so many societal problems that stem from lack of education. It's a matter of where you choose to spend the money.
Yeah, you're right.
Where you choose to spend the money. And so do we invest in people or do we invest in things? See, that's a value a societal value statement. Do all kids matter, or just some kids? Do all lives matter, or just some lives? Big questions. Take a lot of soul searching to come up with the answers. But the answers lead to changes in public policy that lead to doing things differently.
People are so afraid of change.
So they latch on to what they've always known and what they've always done and what they're most comfortable with. And to heck with the rest. And so there we are. So I wish I had a simple answer for you. I would have bottled it a long time ago.
Yeah, but it's important that we know there's no simple answer. It's good that we know that.
No, there are no simple answers.
Yeah.
There's no silver bullet. You know, there are no silver bullets. And we've got to be willing to, you know, I said, well, what are you doing there? What's your contribution to the K-12 system? You're the one sending the trained professionals into the K-12 system. Do you have any ownership over what is going on and how inadequately prepared you sent them out to the K-12 system to do their job? You don't want to talk about that.
No.
You know, so no more finger pointing. But in the absence of a state plan for education, we'll just continue to finger point. We'll just continue to fight over scraps. You know,
Makes me so sad.
it's too bad.